introduce themselves.
Sure. I'll take the lead on this one since I'm still learning my time zones. I am Michael DePiro. I work for the Florida Department of Education, and I'm glad to be here. As you can see, we have Tallahassee, Florida in my background. That's our state capital. And I would like to point out, when you look at a map, Panama City Beach is further west than most of Michigan on a map, which is tough for me to wrap my head around, but I'm sure I knew that at some point in life. So I'm gonna send it over to Tandy to introduce himself.
And hi, my name is Tandy Mcconnell. I spent about 20 years as a professor of history at Columbia College in South Carolina. Then a few years ago, I wanted to do something interesting, so I became a high school history teacher, and I'm delighted to be here with you guys.
I'm Miriam Amarsadeghi. I participated in We the People the first year it was offered. That was the bicentennial of the US Constitution, so a long time ago. I currently serve on the board of the Center for Civic Education, and I've spent a large part of my career providing civic education to people living in Iran, where I'm originally from. And I'm really honored to be with you.
So I would like to give your team an opportunity to introduce.
Thank you for allowing us to testify before you today. We are a unit composed of juniors and seniors from Eastern Rapids High School. I am Sophia Beaucamp.
I'm Isabella Grunwald.
I am Sienna Pulaski.
I'm Max Bruce, and we are coached by the advantageous Adam Horos and the benevolent Benjamin Langholz, and we are Unit 1.
I just want to real quick, can you guys hear Max Bruce? Because we have another computer we can give him if that's a problem.
He comes in pretty clearly.
The volume is definitely lower, so if he raises his volume, we can probably hear him a bit better.
Yeah, but I know he used a thesaurus to do your introduction. All right, Max, you need a second to work on your volume.
You guys hear, is it any better?
Oh, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
We're gonna, can we swap out his computer real fast?
Yeah.
That's odd. That's what's one of there. I looked at it. It's a good school.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you said that, because in Michigan, the University of Michigan is like the center of everyone's universe. So it's good to let them know that U of M can mean different things in different places.
I mean, I knew what it meant because I'm from Pennsylvania and we were huge rivals with Penn State, University of Michigan. But anyway, well, glad you're here and we're going to get started. We are focusing on Unit 1. What are the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system? The question starts with a quote from Benjamin Rush. The quote is, "The American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? And to what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times?" You may begin.
Samuel Cooper, a Revolutionary War soldier, sent word to his family that the dangers we are to encounter, I know, but let the event be what it will be, and in due time I hope to return home in peace. Once Samuel and his compatriots returned home, the revolutionary principles they fought for returned with them. In short, the fight for freedom didn't stop with the war. Those radical ideals of equality, limited government, and popular sovereignty had become infused into the hearts of those soldiers' statement in their state constitutions.
Pennsylvania led with radical revolutionary ideals and other responses to the previous tyrannic rule by barring an established religion and having no property requirement for suffrage. Other states created annual elections for their legislatures to limit their governments by tying it closer to the people. Further limits were enshrined in declarations of rights. Yet, the uneven movements of the English peoples initiated differentiations and the application of this revolutionary spirit.
In Virginia, unlike in Massachusetts, there was an established religion and no freedom of assembly, yielding a much more conservative constitution. Virginia also required the ownership of 50 acres of land in order to vote. On the other hand, Massachusetts was the first state to implement a bicameral legislature, enact veto powers for the governor, and of the first state constitutions, it was the only one to reserve non-delegated powers to the general court.
Imbued within the United States is the concept of popular sovereignty and consent of the governed, which is displayed clearly within the Constitution's deliberate amendment process. Article 5 requires 2/3 of both houses to propose an amendment and 3/4 of the states to ratify such proposal. This requirement of supermajority consent has led to an amendment stagnation, as although 11,000 amendments have been proposed, only 27 of them have been enacted. Thus, popular amendments such as the Equal Rights Amendment have been shut down, creating a political environment that does not allow change to our Constitution.
Further problems of consent are found when creating constitutions. John Locke declared, men being by nature all free, equal, and independent, cannot be subjected to the political power of another without his consent. America's current representative government conflicts with the Lockean principle of consent because although he championed a representative body, he believed the state should be more directly accessed by the people, and social compacts could be anonymous. Our current system relies on the concept of tacit consent. Hence, creating constitutions will always lack unanimous consent of the people it protects.
Thus, the revolutionary spirit has abruptly reclaimed prominence in the modern era, with the Lockean idea of the redressing of grievances for a righteous democratic system taking center stage in today's society. Just in 2020, over 20 million people took part in the wave of protests following the death of George Floyd, vying for systematic representation and equality in American society. Expressed in the late John Lewis's words, a democracy cannot thrive where power remains unchecked, and justice is reserved for a select few. For peace cannot exist where justice is not served.
Nevertheless, we must be wary of those who corrupt revolutionary principles to fit those of undemocratic, un-American views. Most notably in the January 6th insurrection in 2021. Radical factions hijacked our patriotic principles to take violent actions against fellow Americans, violating Locke's laws of the peaceful addressment of grievances and resulting in the wrongful death of several Americans. Thus, Americans as a whole must recognize that the violence used to achieve freedom in 1776 is only detrimental to a representative nation in 2021. Thank you. We are now ready for your questions.
All right, thank you. I'm going to defer to my colleagues to get us started.
Let me
All
throw
right.
a question that, well, go ahead, Miriam.
Okay, sorry, Tandy. My question is about sort of the intersection between consent and civil disobedience. You mentioned George Floyd and all of that. Do you think that violent protest is in keeping with consent, or does it have to be civil disobedience? Does it have to be nonviolent?
Say that when you are consenting to a government as in tacit consent, peaceful nonviolent protests would be what would be required for actual change, especially under the Lockean philosophy of redressment of grievances. This must be done continuously until change is enacted peacefully.
I disagree with my colleague. Although violent protest does get a lot of recognition from the government, violent protest is ultimately immoral, and all avenues of exploiting the addressment of grievances should be taken to before violence is ever done.
Going off of my colleagues, the framers, they addressed their grievances, and the Boston Tea Party was a demonstration of destroying property, and we see with the Black Lives Matter movement that they're destroying property for a much greater cause rather than destroying someone's tea because they don't like the king. And so while it is not okay to destroy property, we have seen an evolution of that.
The protests and violence in the BLM movement are not justified, to clarify.
Can a protest be peaceful, nonviolent, and also law-breaking? And if it is peaceful, nonviolent, and breaks the law, has the fact that it's simply broken the law, does that push it? Does that push it from the territory of protest into something else? I mean, is such a protest protected by the law?
I think
Although the First Amendment guarantees that the freedom of speech and organization shall not be infringed by the government, many states do have time, place, and manner laws. So if people are allowed to express their views and their freedom of speech, However, this must be done in a time that is good, in order that is good, and a manner that is good, and in a place that is advisable in their state.
So in other words, I can protest the actions of my government only as long as it's convenient to the government.
I disagree with my colleague. I think that as long as the person is exhibiting civil disobedience and is willing to take the repercussions of whatever laws they are breaking, I think this is ultimately a just protest.
This could be seen in the sit-ins in the civil rights movement with Dr. Martin Luther King being arrested, but he didn't stop working for what he believed was just.
Okay, thank you.
So, all right, I will go. Sorry about that. So when we're looking at different ways of showing consent, we seem to be focused right now on, civil disobedience. What are some other ways that we show consent? And what do you feel are the strongest ways of showing consent?
I think one of the strongest ways that we show consent to be governed is participating in our government through voting.
Going off of my colleague, we have our state representatives that we are close to, and they are close to the people, and we give them our consent to enact the laws that we want or think our country needs.
So what would you say about low voter turnout and what that means for consent through voting?
I'd argue that low voter turnout is probably one of the greatest factors that are limiting the success of our Republican system. People often do want to express their ideals and their consents to the government, but they're ultimately unable to because they are either unable to vote due to logistical reasons or just simply don't have the courage as they think that the system is not benefiting their ideals. Thus, I think like Locke suggested that every individual should have the opportunity to vote and should be imperative to vote in order to express their ideals to the government. I think this Lockean idea is good, and I think it should be implemented in our current society.
So one more on that and go back to my colleagues. So what would the founders say about a constitutional amendment that required compulsory voting for everyone?
Say that requiring compulsory voting is a good thing. It would require that people actually take part in our government system and that everybody would actually have a voice. I would rather have just a voting rights amendment, so it doesn't matter if you necessarily don't have your voter ID on you. You can just vote, and there are no requirements besides being eligible by age of 18 that you can just use your voice and in the popular sovereignty of our country, put forth your ideas.
I disagree with my colleague. I don't think the founders would be in favor of having an amendment that enacts compulsory voting. I think they would see this as a overreach of government like involvement with the people, which was something that they were strongly against.
Going off of my colleagues, our country was founded on the principle of natural rights. And so by creating an amendment that would enforce voting, it would take away from our natural rights that we are given in this nation.
Colleagues, do you all have anything to add on?
I would be in concurrence with Polsky, specifically because a lot of times in America, people express their grievances by protest voting. Although I earlier argued that Locke would be in favor of everybody voting, the founders did not necessarily take everything from Locke. They did agree that expressing grievances in consent can be done through protest voting. I think they would probably agree with that. Thus, as a lot of people protest vote, even in 2016 and 2020, there was a great deal of people who protest voted for third parties. I think that not voting is, in addition to that, would probably be also very imperative in our government.
On the flip side of this, is the Electoral College a good idea?
There have been there have been many times in the past 100 years where the popular vote has been against what the actual Electoral College voted in. And there have been suggestions to change the Electoral College, but none of them have been passed through.
I'd argue that the Electoral College is, in contrast to my colleague, that the Electoral College is essentially the cooling saucer of the majority, kind of like the Senate in our legislative system. Although the people may push for radical candidates for president, the Electoral College will ensure that those electoral candidates have less influence and opens up moderation that our country as an entirety can agree to.
Contrary to my colleague, I would argue that the Electoral College is not needed, as we have seen laws being passed through in states enforcing that the electors vote with the popular vote. And the electors for the Electoral College are just random people, and they can be college students to adults, and the founders intended it to be smarter people that knew more about, oh, may I finish my statement?
Sure, Sophia.
That were more knowledgeable, and that is just not the case in present times.
Well, we do appreciate all of your answers, and we're just going to take a couple minutes to give you a little bit of feedback and then say our goodbyes for the day. So I'll start off, and I found your introduction statement to be very strong in how it was structured and building logically through popular sovereignty, 2/3, 3/4, and then you get to amendment stagnation. So I thought it was a great introduction statement. Through the free flow question period, I noticed there was a lot of disagreement within the group, which is fine. But I think one of the ways that you may be able to alleviate some of that is think back to the principles you stated in your introduction statement and think back through a founder's lens. And doing that, it may help you focus your answers more on the foundational principles rather than just an I think kind of thing, because what you think is wonderful, but we need to then connect the reasoning back to here's the principle in the Constitution, our founding document. Miriam, would you like to give some feedback?
I really enjoyed how specific you got and the energy you put into your answers. That's not always the case. You brought up George Floyd. I think that was important. We don't think about these things in a vacuum. We think about them because they are guiding us in the world that we live in today, the United States, our role as citizens. It's definitely not the intention. It was definitely not the intention of the founding fathers to pontificate for the sake of pontificating. And it's incumbent on us to make all of this relevant to our lives and to make it a matter of our civic responsibility. And I could feel that in your presentation. I think you guys have a lot to be proud of. I wish you the very, very best. I'd like to hear where you're going to college too. I think you mentioned, well, some of you mentioned it maybe.
Yeah, we were using that as a stall tactic, but if I remember correctly, Ben has redefined UM as Michigan. We have a Grand Valley State. I think that was ISA. Is it ESA? So what is it? I'm sorry.
Oh, ISA.
ISA. And Sophia and Sienna are juniors and they're undecided. I don't know.
I'm a junior. She's not.
I'm a senior. I'm going to the University of
I'm
Michigan.
My name is Max. I'm just using Langholz's computer, but University of Michigan is probably good. I'm a junior, so I haven't decided, but U of M is probably going to be a good school. University of Michigan, of course.
Very good.
And Tandy, do you have feedback?
Yeah, it was a great presentation. I actually like very much having an argument to say, as my distinguished colleague says, yes, but I would want to take this different perspective. It is important, as Michael said, to base your disagreement on the text, on the data, and on the reasoning that we'd expect to come from the founders. But I thought you presented these different ideas, and argument is a good way to present. You're giving us a dialogue among yourselves, and that's a very effective way to deepen the argument and show your understanding of the material. So I like that. I really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, it's the end of the day for you. It's the end of the day for us. And I couldn't have asked for a more enjoyable team to have at the end of the day at almost 3 o'clock for everybody on this call. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna.
Well, wonderful job again. Thank you guys for participating and congratulations on making it to the national finals. We wish you the best of luck. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Judges, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, teacher.